Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. This is Mr. Hales coming at you with the Westward Expansion Podcast slash Videocast. Used to be a podcast, but then my cell phone wouldn't link up with the Chromebook. So now we're going to do our best with the videocasts, and these videocasts do go on YouTube. So what I would do is you either watch from your phone, a computer at home, or take all of the videos and make a slideshow of it, because apparently you can watch YouTube if it's on a slideshow. So get ready, have a pen, pencil, some paper out, and get ready to take good notes. So the very first open-ended response question for the test is, how did mining encourage the growth of the West? How did mining encourage the growth of the West? So when gold was struck in California in 1849, merchants and traders, they followed the miners into new areas. And what did they do? They set up and built restaurants, saloons, hardware stores. All right. They developed a town. All right, so the merchants and traders, they followed the miners into new areas to sell them the goods that they needed. And this influx of people, so the population increase led to the development of new towns. And towns that look very similar to Pompton Lakes, with the restaurants, saloons, hardware stores, dentists' offices, things like that, doctors. And this led to a growing need for a railway system as well. All right. So the influx of people, population increase, led to the development of new towns and a growing need for that railway system. So that is question number one for the open-ended response questions. The second question, describe four problems that occurred in mining towns. Describe four problems that occurred in mining towns. Now, you're only going to need four. I'm going to give you more than four right now. You pick the four that you remember best when you take the test. So, boom towns often became ghost towns when the ore ran out. So when the gold, the silver, when that ran out, then the boom towns, people left these towns, and these towns often became ghost towns. Some ghost towns still exist today. If you drive through parts of the West, right, you can actually see abandoned towns, which is actually pretty cool. That's part of history. Water pollution was a problem when clear mountain streams became polluted. All right, they're sifting through these mountain streams. These miners, very dirty. They clean themselves in these mountain streams, and all that water supply becomes polluted, right? So that's two. Third, lawlessness and disorder often developed when a town grew rapidly. So towns grew rapidly. They really didn't have a police force, really didn't have their own government. It was vigilantes are taking up the mantle of stopping crime, right? Stopping lawlessness. So that was a problem. Lawlessness and disorder often developed when a town grew rapidly. Four, forests became depleted as miners cut down trees to get wood for buildings and other things. Railroad ties being one of them, the wooden railroad ties. So these forests became depleted. This was pretty much the start of deforestation in this part of the United States. All right. Racism led to unfair treatment of Mexican and Chinese miners. So racism led to unfair treatment of Mexican and Chinese miners. Few miners ever got rich, few miners and prospectors, small prospectors ever got rich. Large landowning companies came in because they could afford the costly equipment that can go deep down into the ground or into the mountain. All right, even below the mountain in some case, they can dig down. And lastly, one of the last things that we just learned about, Native Americans were forced off their land, which caused conflict and war with the settlers. We obviously got into that quite a bit at the end of this unit. So, all right, so that's question number 2. Pick 4. I believe I gave you 7. Pick 4 of the 7. How did a broad network of railroads develop in the years after the Civil War? So I'm looking for 5 answers here, each worth 2 on the test. All right, so railroad track widths, the gauge of the widths, all right, became standardized. Standardized means the same. And this enabled thousands of new miles, thousands of miles of new track to be built. All right, so this standardization of the width, the gauge of the railroad track, led to thousands of miles of new track being laid. Time zones were created to keep train schedules on schedule. To keep trains on schedule. As we know, it's earlier out west than it is where we are in Pompton Lakes. So the trains that would blast out west were sometimes not on time. People were there early. People missed trains. But now, with the time zones, they were created to keep trains on schedule. Air brakes, George Westinghouse was the inventor. They were invented to make travel safer. You can go quicker that way as long as you can use that air brake. And lastly, travel became more comfortable. The sleeping cars were built, dining cars, lavatories. These were part of George Pullman's idea, the George Pullman car. All right, Pullman car it's called. To make rail travel, more comfortable, because sometimes you're on the train for a very long period of time. All right. So that was question 3. 4th question, and this is a 2-part question. Make sure you have answers for both parts. So why did railroad companies have trouble getting workers? Looking for 4 answers on there. Labor was scarce during the Civil War, which means they didn't have enough workers. All the men were fighting for the most part. The work was backbreaking. All right, it was hard work, backbreaking work, dangerous. We remember how we talked about, the Irish immigrants going 10 miles a day through the heat of the Midwest plains. But the Chinese immigrants who worked on the rail lines, they have to go through 2 different mountain ranges. All right, so it was very, very dangerous work. And on top of all that, the pay was low. All right, so what happened? How did railroad companies solve this problem? So railroad companies, they hired immigrant workers who accepted the low wages. The Central Pacific Rail Line that started in Sacramento, California, brought in thousands of workers from China, while the Union Pacific, starting in Omaha, Nebraska, hired newcomers from Ireland. All right, and on both lines, you had African Americans and Mexican Americans working for each line. Do not lump African Americans and Mexican Americans into the immigrant conversation, or points will be deducted for that. All right? And last but not least, this is the shortest test of the year, I believe. So there are only 5 open-ended response questions. We have, how did life change for the Plains Indians between the 1860s and the 1880s? How did life change for the Plains Indians between the 1860s and the 1880s? You're gonna be required 5 of these answers. I'm gonna give you 6. You're gonna be required to get full credit 5. Actually, you want to know what? To get full credit 4. I'll give you 2.5 points for each. All right, 5. 5 at 2 points. I'll require 4 for 2.5 points each for a total of 10. Make it a little bit easier, but I'm going to give you 6. So choose the 4 that you remember best. How did life change for the Plains Indians between the 1860s and the 1880s? How did life change for the Plains Indians between the 1860s and the 1880s? First, the United States government broke many treaties, all right, Fort Laramie Treaty being one of them. And this led to war and loss of life and land. We talk about that Chivington Massacre, right? So the United States broke many treaties, and this led to war and a loss of life and land. So that's one. Then you had the Peace Commission was established by federal officials. This urged Native Americans to settle down and adopt the lifestyle as white settlers. Children were sent to white schools to learn the American way of life. Okay, so that Peace Commission, very important. Children were sent to the white schools to learn the American way of life. Many Native American tribes were forced onto reservations, which restricted their ability to hunt. These natives, especially these Plains Indians, they were hunters. They followed the buffalo on horseback. They were not farmers. All right. We told them to farm. And meanwhile, they weren't farmers. They were hunters. So they were forced onto reservations, and this restricted their ability to hunt. Okay. Settlers killed buffalo at a quick rate. And this pretty much ended the Native American way of life. They relied on everything in terms of the buffalo. They depended on the buffalo for food, clothing, shelter, tools. They even used the gallbladder of the buffalo as a water canteen. So they used every part of the buffalo. All right, and it wasn't only the settlers that were killing off the buffalo. But there were droughts. I mean, there was Mother Nature issues, droughts. But I mean, they were dying of disease, which the settlers brought over. Habitat destruction, especially with that rail line being laid down. So the Dawes Act, all right, was passed to encourage Native Americans to become farmers. Dawes Act was passed to encourage Native Americans to become farmers. And Dawes Act will be on the test in a separate spot as well. And lastly, because of settlers' fear, the ghost dance, as well as other Native American traditions, were totally disallowed. All right. So because of settlers' fear, the ghost dance, as well as other Native American traditions, were disallowed. All right. And we're learning that from our Native American skits. All right. And on top of all of that, for the test, you need to know about the Fort Laramie Treaty, the Homestead Act again, the Dawes Act of 1887. The Comstock Lode comes up there a couple times. Railroad rebates, railroad pools. How did railroads affect the economy of the United States? The advances that made a network of railroad lines possible. The Transcontinental Railroad. What happened with the demand of beef with growing cities in the East? Many cowhands with the cattle drives, the cow towns. The cowhands were taught by vaqueros, right? The vaqueros know how to spell vaqueros as well. And just know about the cattle drive and the cow towns. I think that'll do it. And the last part of this test, all right, you're going to have only two events that you have to know the date for. So, first Transcontinental Rail Line and the Dawes Act. So, first Transcontinental Railroad, 1869, completed in 1869, and then you have the Dawes Act, 1887. All right, and that should do it. So study a lot, study hard. All right, thanks.